Hello and welcome to another edition of FNR Ask the Expert. Today we're going to be talking about wildlife food plots with Purdue Extension Wildlife Specialist Jared Brook. So we're going to be talking about all things what to plant, when to plant it, and what animals you can expect to get with those plantings. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to put those in the comment section on Facebook, and Jared will answer those throughout the broadcast. So I guess, Jared, let's get started there. What is a wildlife food plot, and how is that different from just letting my land be and letting the animals just kind of do their thing?
Yeah, so when we talk about wildlife food plots, generally we're talking about planting some sort of agricultural crop for the specific benefit of wildlife. And that can be a lot of different things and can be a lot of different species of wildlife. But generally, most often, people are planting some sort of crop for a game species or something you can hunt. And that's mainly for deer and turkeys and some other species. And there's really kind of two or three general reasons why people might plant a food plot, regardless of what wildlife species it is. The first one and the most common one is that people want to plant something that's attractive to wildlife, that's going to attract wildlife to a specific area or to their property. So generally that's going to be for the reason of either just seeing more wildlife. So something like sunflowers, you can plant sunflowers to attract species you can hunt. There's also a lot of songbirds that will be attracted to a sunflower field. Or you can, beyond just attracting wildlife to see on your property, they can also be a draw for those that have property that like to hunt. They can be attractive to some of the game species that we might have and give you more opportunities to harvest an animal. Another reason people plant a food plot a lot is to increase or improve the food availability on their property, so you can produce more food on a property, and especially during times of year when food may be limiting to a certain wildlife species, so you can increase your attractiveness of your property, but also increase the food availability when it might be limited on your property. The third reason is maybe you just want to overall increase in the number of individual animals in your property, which can be achieved with food plots. But one of the most important things to think about with food plots is that food plots are a supplement. So they're a supplement to overall habitat management of your property. So in the case of deer, there are lots and lots of things that we can do to improve a property for white-tailed deer. The last of which, usually the one that I think of last is food plots. But generally that's the first one that a lot of landowners and people think about is, well, I want to go plant food plots. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's a great practice to use, but it only serves one purpose generally, and that's to provide food. But animals need food, water, cover, and space to create habitat. So we can do a lot of different management practices, managing some of our old fields on the property, just letting old fields go, going into the woods and creating more sunlight in the woods, which can both create more food and more cover. So when we're talking about food plots, we're generally talking about creating a short-term food increase on the property that's attractive to wildlife.
Awesome. That's a great explanation for us. To start out with, what are some of the resources that we have available to us that might explain some of the basics of food plots, or that people can use at their leisure as they're beginning to do some of this planning?
Yeah, absolutely. So one really good resource is actually contacting the Department of Natural Resources. They have private lands biologists or district biologists that work with landowners that are interested in wildlife management. I mean, you can call them specifically, maybe even about food plots, but they're also going to give you a more holistic view of your property and things you can do on your property. And if Wendy doesn't have that link, I can put the link to a website that we have where we can, you can get a list of all the people that work in your county that can come out and help you on your property or answer questions. Beyond that, we have a publication or two on food plots through Purdue Extension. Other states' extension services have materials on food plots. There's different conservation organizations like the National Wild Turkey Federation, the Quality Deer Management Association, and groups like that that are wildlife conservation organizations that have a wealth of information about food plots that's really geared towards landowners that can help you determine what to plant, when to plant it, how to do it, and all of those things. If you really want to take a deep dive into food plots for wildlife, one of the resources that I use constantly when I'm out in the field talking about food plots or planting food plots. Actually, we just planted some food plots yesterday, my intern and I had this book with me when we were going through it, but this is the book here, and Wendy will put a link in there. It's kind of hard to see, but it's called Wildlife Food Plots and Early Successional Plants, and it was written by a colleague and a friend of mine at the University of Tennessee, Dr. Craig Harper. It's about 300 to 400 pages, but it's about the best information that you can get on food plots for wildlife, with the benefit of all the information that's in there is backed up by experience and backed up by research. So all the trials and tribulations of planting food plots and the effort and things that go into it comes out in this book. It's a really great resource. It has different seed mixes to plant for different species, has information about site prep, doing soil tests, information about using herbicides to manage weeds. And then the kicker of the book is the last 150 or 200 pages or so is actually plant ID for various early successional plants, so forbs and grasses that you might find on your property or might find in your food plots. So an awesome resource. And I like to say that it's a habitat management book, all encompassing, disguised as a food plot book. So you'll learn all about food plots. We also learn all about how to manage your property holistically and different aspects for these various wildlife species. So good one to pick up.
And all of those resources are in the comment section there on Facebook, so you can feel free to click those links and save those and go back and look at a later time. Jared, when should I really be starting thinking about fall? Should I be planting things now, or should I be kind of planning? What kind of is my time schedule as I look ahead to management for fall?
Yeah, that's a great question. So we kind of hit this at a perfect time. I know we had this scheduled for a couple weeks ago, which would have been as great as well, but unfortunately I had to reschedule. I had to serve my civic duty as a juror last minute, so that's why we had to reschedule. But we're kind of at the perfect time right now to be considering and planting food plots. So like I said, my intern and I were out yesterday. We planted several food plots on experimental food plots on some of our properties. And so really that August 15th timeframe, plus or minus a couple weeks on either side, is generally what I shoot for when I think about establishing my fall food plots. And those are generally going to be our cool season plants, things that we want to grow and provide food anytime from September all the way through next May into June.
So get me started, Jared. I'm ready to plant food plots. What's my first step? What should I be looking for? Are there certain areas on my property where those food plots should go? Can you help me out a little bit, kind of in the beginning phases of the planning stage?
Yeah. So if we're thinking about planting food plots on a property for the very first time, the first thing is to kind of consider where you want to plant them. So what site are you going to plant? And obviously it's easier you're not going to get a food plot to grow in closed canopy woods. They need sunlight to grow. So the first step is figure out where you have open areas on your property. Maybe there's an open field. Maybe there's a little gap in the canopy in the woods. Maybe you have a road running through your woods. There's already some ag land on the property or some pasture. Those are going to be the first places you'll consider planting a food plot. And if you have certain areas that you want to put a food plot in the woods to be attractive to wildlife, then you can start considering, hey, maybe I need to open the woods up a little bit, maybe clear an area and create a food plot. But it's going to be a lot easier and save you a lot of time and effort if you can take areas that are already open and are receiving sunlight to plant. So site is first, right? You're going to pick the site. Right after that, you're going to want to do a soil test, and we're going to do it. And that's probably the cheapest piece of information and the best piece of information you can get when doing food plots is a soil test. So you're just going to take, you can either use a soil probe or a shovel out to your site, get about a half of lunch sack full of soil, and there's several labs that you can send the soil into to get a soil test. That's going to tell you a lot of information about your site. It's going to tell you your pH of the soil, so how acidic or basic it is. Most plants are going to grow best with the pH kind of right in the middle from 6 to 7. It's going to tell you, and then it's going to tell you how much lime you might need to amend the soil. It's going to tell you how much fertilizer you're going to need, and all that information about the soil that's going to be helpful. So once you get your soil test and soil test results back, you can think about what am I going to plant in this site. So that's seed. And so you're going to think about what wildlife species or groups of wildlife species am I interested in attracting. That's going to influence what species you plant. What time of year am I trying to provide food for them? Do I just want, and overall, what is the goal of the food plot? Is it to provide an attraction for hunting? So do I want there to be a lot of food during the hunting season? Or is it really to supplement the existing food on the property? And that's going to influence what species you plant, and if you plant a single species or a mix of species. And then you think about, how am I going to prepare that site? So once we have the seed selected, when you think about, what am I going to do? What's already in the site? Is there already existing vegetation that I need to remove? And if so, how am I going to do that? Is that going to be with some sort of tillage? Is that going to be with herbicide? How am I going to prepare that site? So once I've considered that, then you're going to talk about, how am I actually going to establish the site? So is it going to be with a no-till drill or some sort of machinery, or is it going to be hand spreading and broadcasting the seed on the surface? Once you get that, then you're talking about, how am I going to manage the planting? So lots of steps involved, and it seems like a lot of work, but once you think through those, you can come to a pretty good conclusion. And luckily, with the cool season food plots that we're planting this time of year, there's not going to be a lot of weed control effort that you have to do to get them to grow after planting.
So I hope you were making a checklist there. If not, we'll have this archived,
I'll go back to it real quick. So we got site, so pick our site. We got soil test. We got preparing our site, picking our seed, and establishing our seed, and then managing. So 6 steps.
That's not so terrible. It just sounded like a lot.
That's right.
And
it's all in this book.
It's all in the book. So get the book. If you are wanting to do this and you're ready for all these steps and things like that, are there things that I could do wrong? Because that sounds like a whole lot of things that could go wrong. If I plant something, is that better than nothing? If I mess up and I plant stuff in like the shaded area of my woods, am I really not doing anything and just wasting money? Like,
yeah.
What are some of my common
there's
things
lots
I can avoid?
Yeah, there's lots of wrong steps along the path, but you got to think about, you're also learning from all those wrong steps. And I probably learned more from what I've done wrong than what I've done right. Some of the common mistakes that people make are picking the wrong site. So if you have a site and that's closed canopy woods, you're not going to get much growing in there just because you don't have enough sunlight. Or you may pick a site that's too wet or too dry for the seed that you want to sow. So picking the wrong site, sowing the wrong species. So generally it's not too big of a deal if you pick the wrong species, but there are some species that are commonly planted for wildlife that we may want to avoid. And those are species that may be invasive, or species that the deer or whatever wildlife you're interested in aren't going to be interested in. And we can go through those in a minute, but beyond that, not getting a soil test Because if you plant something out there and your soil is not fertile enough or the pH is too low, then you've just wasted money because it's not going to grow as well as it could. Not preparing the site well. So just, if you go out into your lawn and you try to sow a bunch of seeds in your lawn with it being nice and lush and green, you're not going to get a lot grow just because there's so much competition there. There's no sunlight getting to the ground, and what you sow can actually grow. So you need to remove a lot of that existing vegetation before you can really sow it correctly and get it to grow. So lots of mistakes you can make along the way, but it's a journey. We're learning all together. And if you kind of think about those things beforehand and give yourself some time to prepare, then you can avoid a lot of those common pitfalls.
So earlier you talked about the different options, tilling and hand sowing and things like that. Do I need a lot of money or equipment to be able to do these food plots properly, or is that something I can do on a budget, or with some of the things I can find locally at my local feed and seed shop, or those type of things?
Yeah. So obviously the more equipment you have, the easier things get and the more efficient you can do things, but then equipment costs money and can get expensive. And so there's ways that you can establish food plots pretty effectively for a low cost. And those are generally, you can establish food plots with as little as a mower or a weed eater, a hand or backpack sprayer, and then a hand seed spreader, where you typically buy them at your local lawn and garden store that you might seed your yard with. And so what you're going to do is, obviously you want to remove that vegetation with a mower, or mow it with the mower and the weed eater, and then use your herbicide sprayer to kill the existing vegetation. And then right before a rain, you can go out there and you can hand seed spread the seed on the ground, and that rain will help work that seed into the soil. And this time of year, that method typically works best with perennial clovers like ladino clover and red clover. That's a really, if I had to pick a cheap food plot to establish, that would be it. Now the expense comes in when you go in to manage some of the weeds that might come in 2 or 3 years down the road. So there is some expense there. It can be done cheaply, but if you try to take the cheap route out, you end up probably with a plot that's not as good later on. So buying cheap seed can be a pitfall, because it may not germinate well. It may not be species that you would actually want to plant for wildlife. So just expect to invest a little bit of money and effort into planting food plots and doing it the right way. If you're not wanting to do that, there's ways that you can manage your property to increase food and increase cover for wildlife and provide better habitat that are cheaper than food plots, and still provide that food and have the added benefit of providing cover. And that would be things like managing, say you have a pasture on your property, managing that pasture to get rid of some of the undesirable vegetation like fescue or brome or things like that, and allowing the natural seed bank to come through, which provides food for deer and for other wildlife species as well as cover. Or you can even go into the woods and think about opening up your woods a little bit. And if you play your cards right, and get a forester out there to come take a look at the property, you may even be able to increase the habitat quality for a variety of wildlife species like deer and turkey, while making a little bit of money by selling some of the timber. So and then you can reinvest that money into the property as in food plots or in other habitat management. So different ways to think about it, depending on what you're trying to get out of that food plot.
I guess that's the next question and just a reminder, if you do have questions, put those in the comment section on Facebook, and Jared will answer those as we go along here. You mentioned that, Jared, some of the clover and things like that I should be planting right now. Why don't we talk a little bit about that? What types of things should I be planting, and what types of animals are those going to attract?
Yeah, so you will not find more opinions about a wildlife related topic than you will about food plots. Everyone that I talk to has their kind of go-to mix, their go-to species, their favorite food plot, and they have a variety of reasons why they like it. And a lot of that's going to depend on what your site can handle, what species of wildlife you're interested in, and other factors like that, how big the site is, where the site, how much shade it gets. Those are all going to weigh into what you should plant. Generally, we're thinking about planting either a single species or a mixture of species. Generally, we're planting some sort of cereal grain, which is going to be things like wheat or cereal rye, not ryegrass. Ryegrass is a species that you often see a lot planted for wildlife, and deer will eat it when it's young, but if given the choice, deer would rather eat cereal rye or oats or wheat rather than annual ryegrass. And another reason I don't recommend annual ryegrass is because it can become problematic if you let it go to seed and don't kill it before it goes to seed. I've been on several properties where they planted an annual ryegrass food plot 3 or 4 years ago, and now the main weed that they're trying to control is annual ryegrass. So I try to stay away from annual ryegrass. You'll find it in a lot of mixes, but it's just has too many problems and there's too many alternatives to it. So generally it's going to be cereal grain, oats, wheat, or cereal rye. A lot of times people will plant clovers. Those could be annual clovers. They could be things like crimson clover, balanza clover, or Persine clover. And then you get into perennial clovers as well, which are things like white clover, ladino clover, red clover, and then species like chicory, which are perennials. And then another common one that people plant a lot are the brassicas. So those are going to be things like turnips, radishes, kale even. So people plant kale for deer, and rapeseed. So those are all brassicas that people plant. And there's several other species that people plant as well, like Austrian winter peas. And those are all what are considered cool season foragers or cool season plants. And that's what we're going to be thinking about planting this time of year to grow during the fall, all the way through the winter and into the spring. And we'll come back in the spring and talk about warm season plants, but cool season plants are what we're planting now. Most of those species can be planted as a single species, so by themselves, or you can plant them in a mix. And there's advantages and disadvantages to doing both. But we can get into that if we want.
So they like cereal, they're breakfast people, and they're kind of healthy because they like kale and radishes and things like that. Now, when you talk about planting kale and radishes and things like that, I know a lot of people have issues with deer and other wildlife critters coming in to their property and eating their actual garden vegetables. Is this something different if we give them their own food plot? Are they going to not eat my garden or not?
Well, it's a good question, and it's a debated question on whether or not that helps. But certainly if you place it away from the garden, then they may kind of go over there and maybe avoid your garden. But I would still, if you have issues with deer in your garden, I would still think about fencing the garden, just because it's going to be easier and you're going to have to deal with less problems if you can fence it and keep deer and rabbits and things out of it, rather than letting them have those tasty treats.
Okay, so next question. I'm ready. I've got my soils checked and all of those type of things. I'm ready. Should I go to my local feed and seed store? Are there better places for me to go to get those resources in order to plant the right things that you're telling us to plant?
Yeah, so you have a couple different options when it comes to actually purchasing the seed. You can go through your local ag co-op or feed and seed store. They often have companies that specialize in making food plot seed that they contract with and that they get seed from. And so you say you want to plant a mix, right? You have the option of going to the co-op and say, I want to buy these 3 species. And we'll just say that our mix is going to, and this is a mix that I use a lot, probably one of my favorite mixes, is wheat, crimson clover, and then some sort of brassica like a turnip. That's a common mix I use. It's pretty foolproof in the fall and pretty easy to use. Provides food for several months out of the year, so it's a pretty easy one to establish, and provides food for a lot of different wildlife species. So say those are the 3 species that I want to plant. I can go to the local co-op and say, can you find me wheat seed? Can you find me crimson clover? And can you find me turnips? They're going to ask you what kind of turnips you want. There's several different kinds. But you can find all those 3 separately, and then you can mix them together yourself and plant your own mix. That has the advantages of you know where the seed comes from. It may be a little cheaper to buy those separately, especially if you're planting lots of acreages of food plots. The other option is to buy a pre-mixed commercial mix, and there are several companies and several places that you can buy already mixed food plot seed. You can go on the internet and search and find several companies that sell them, and the companies most of the companies spend a lot of time doing research and planning these things and making sure the mixes work and making sure that they're attractive to wildlife and things like that. So you can really find some really good mixes. You may pay a little premium on those because they're already mixed and there's already the work behind them, but it's certainly an option. But I will tell you that there are certainly advantages to that, but there are also disadvantages to that as well. Especially if you go to, say, like your local sporting goods store and just pick up a bag of seed off the shelf because you think it looks attractive and you like the packaging or things like that. A lot of times, especially with things like throw and grow mixes, they put some species in there that may not be attractive to wildlife, but grow pretty readily and pretty easily. And those would be things like annual ryegrass that may not be as attractive to wildlife as other species. And they may actually be putting in their species that deer won't eat or other wildlife species won't eat. And the case in point with that is I went into a local sporting goods store, and I will not say the name for anonymity reasons, but they were selling a food plot mix that had orchard grass and alfalfa. And they were selling it as a perennial mix. So it's half alfalfa, half orchard grass. Deer will eat, and lots of things will eat alfalfa. It can be a really good food plot. But orchard grass, which is a perennial cool season grass, which is not native, very few wildlife species, and deer including, do not eat orchard grass. So you would be planting half of your mix in something that deer wouldn't necessarily eat. So when it comes to buying pre-mixed packaged seed mixes, just do your homework, do your due diligence, make sure that what you're buying is actually going to be attractive to wildlife. And the great thing about these commercial mixes, and any seed that you buy for planting food plots or different things like that, they all are required to have what's called a seed tag. And every bag that you buy at a sporting goods store has a seed tag on it. It's usually on the bottom, and it's a little label that tells you exactly what species of plants are in that mix. And so you can do your research, figure out what you want to plant, and make sure that those are the species that's in the mix. And there's not any filler seed or seed that wildlife wouldn't be attracted to. They're also going to tell you the quality of that seed. So how much of that seed will germinate, and how much of it is actually the seed that you want. It'll also tell you if there is any weed seed in that bag of seed, and it'll tell you if there's any what are called noxious weeds, which are weeds that you're required by law not to plant or to manage, and if you do have them, you have to manage. So by looking at that seed tag, you can say, okay, it's got the species I want. It's free or almost entirely free of weed seed. So I'm not introducing any new weed into my area. And it's quality seed. And I know the variety and things like that of it. So regardless of which way you go, if you buy a commercial seed mix or you mix the seed yourself, make sure you check the seed tag and the label to make sure that you're getting what you want and that it's high quality seed and it's free of weeds.
So I'm going to ask the $1,000,000 question. Should I be planting a single species or a mix? And does it matter based on what types of animals I'm trying to attract?
Yes, pick your poison. Either one, and people have strong opinions either way. There's benefits and disadvantages to each one. So if common, we see a lot of people may plant something like oats in a single species, or turnips or radishes in a single species. And those can have their benefits because with a single species planting, you can really maximize the amount of tonnage of forage out there. But the downside of that is because it's a single species, that forage is usually the highest quality and most available at a single point in time, or a couple of points in time with things like radishes and turnips. They're going to be used by deer and other species for the green tops that they produce. And then when, say, a radish or turnips, if it frost kills in the winter, they're going to eat the tubers throughout the winter. So usually you can maximize the amount of tonnage of forage you have, but it's usually for a short window. And if that window lines up with what you want it to, say hunting season, and that's perfect for your situation. The benefit of a mix is you have a mixture of species. You may not produce as much tonnage of a single species as you would with a single species mix, but you're going to have different species that are producing forage at different times of year. So you're going to have something that's attractive at its peak attractiveness or peak quality for a longer period of time. So say if we take wheat, crimson clover, and turnips, those are all going to be producing for a long period of time. You're going to have different attractiveness based on the species that you have. So you can also plant those and then have them be producing forage and feeding wildlife for various times a year. So either way, people go either way. I mean, I do a combination. I have some single species plantings like brassicas, which are turnips and radishes, but most of what I do is a mix because I'm interested not only in attracting wildlife to the area, but also providing supplemental food at various times of year.
You mentioned hunting. Okay, so say I hunt on some property and it's kind of an agricultural area. Are there different things I should be planting versus, an opening in my woodlands or things like that, to keep those deer coming come hunting season?
Yeah, so a lot of hunters, especially in Indiana and the Midwest, they hunt a woodlot that's adjacent to an agricultural field, and maybe they own the woodlot in the ag field, or maybe they lease it, or maybe they just hunt on a friend's property, on a neighbor, or they just have permission. They have permission to hunt it, but maybe they don't have permission to put in a food plot or do anything like that. You can use that crop ground to your advantage. If you're interested, you can potentially, if you have a good relationship with the farmer, the farmer, you can potentially ask them or even pay them to leave some standing crops, some standing corn or standing soybeans through the winter. You can ask them if you could plant something on the edge of the woodlot in the crop field after they come through and harvest. And that could be things like oats and some sort of brassica like a radish. Those two things, especially in northern Indiana, will frost kill. So the first frost or first really hard frost, those will die. And then the farmer doesn't have to worry about them trying to come back and take care of them in the spring. The other option, which is a really good option, is that you could talk to your farmer about cover crops. And so if you're in the ag world or adjacent to the ag world, or even gardeners talk a lot about cover crops. And most of the things that we're talking about from a food plots perspective, cereal rye, wheat, crimson clover, brassicas, are all the same species that a farmer would plant on their field as a cover crop. In Indiana, we plant a lot of cover crops. We have, nearly 1 million acres of cover crops planted throughout the year. So a lot of ag ground has cover crops on it. There's certainly benefits to the farmer to have cover crops, And then there's also benefits to you as a hunter if you're hunting in an area that has cover crops. So talking to the landowner, farmer about cover crops, or finding a place to hunt where they already plant cover crops can be a great way to kind of utilize the ag ground that's already there.
So I guess to wrap up, Jared, what are some quick and dirty tips you have for us for cheap and or really good small tips you have as we go into this planting season?
Yeah. So as you go into this planting season, think about why you're planting the food plot. That's the first thing, because that's going to kind of determine all the next steps as far as what you plant, when you plant it, and that kind of stuff. So think about why you're planting it. Is it to attract wildlife? Is it to provide a supplemental food source? Think about what equipment you have available to you. And maybe if you don't have certain equipment, there's places like the Soil and Water Conservation District where you may be able to actually rent some equipment like a no-till drill. A lot of Soil and Water Conservation Districts have no-till drills for rent. So think about what equipment you have. Think about how you're going to prepare the site. Is it going to be something like disking it or rototilling it, or is it going to be using herbicides? And then think about kind of what seed, obviously, you're going to select, and that's based on what wildlife you're interested in, what fits in your site, and things like that. And it's really one of the, like I said, one of the ones that I go with a lot is wheat, crimson clover, and some sort of brassica, or even wheat and crimson clover by themselves. Those are fairly cheap and inexpensive annual plot that's pretty easy to establish and manage. And beyond that, if you're looking at a perennial plot, if you look at something that grows year after year, some sort of white clover like ladino clover, a red clover, and even chicory added together and planted with a cereal grain like oats or wheat is a pretty good one, an easy one to establish that will be there for years if you manage it correctly. And then lastly,
go ahead.
Lastly, when it comes to food plots, they're often the first places that landowners and hunters want to go and spend their time and effort. But I would encourage you to think of food plots as a supplement to other management that you're doing on the property. And if you spend half as much time on managing your woods or managing your fields as a lot of landowners do on food plots, your property will be well and above a lot of properties in providing habitat for wildlife.
And I guess to wrap up, Jared, finally, as I look at the seasons, we're talking about planting cool crops right now. Mm-hmm. And those are going to attract deer. And then into the winter, and then that's going to, our turkeys, or who else is going to come visit me based on my food plots. And then when is the next time I need to worry about planting the next thing? Kind of run us through the quick cycle of
so
how that works.
That's a really good question. And the wheat and crimson clover plot that I mentioned is a really good one for deer. It's also a really good one for turkeys, especially in the spring as the wheat seed heads are produced and the clover is growing in the spring. Turkeys will visit it regularly. They'll be eating the clover, they'll be eating the wheat seeds and things like that. And so that's a really good one in the spring for turkeys. And then if you just let that wheat and clover food plot sit during the summer and don't do anything else to it, we call that a fallow food plot or a fallow wheat field. That's going to provide really good habitat for turkeys with broods or young, because they can see over the top of it, and it's providing weeds and insects and things like that, as well as really good habitat for bobwhite quail and their broods as well. And then fawns can even be dropped in there in the summer and things like that. So, or you can think about how are you going to plant your next food plot into it, whether that's a warm season food plot or waiting until the end of summer next year and planting another cool season food plot. So you have options for what you want to do with it.
And we have a question from the audience before we close here. Karen wants to know, are powering right-of-ways good for food plots? And are there any rules and regulations for using those?
Yeah, so food plots power lines are really good spots for food plots, generally because they like to keep them open and free of trees and shrubs and things like that, so they don't interfere with the power lines. And so I have lots of people that I work with and seen lots of food plots and power lines. They typically get enough sun to plant a lot of different things. I would encourage you, if you own the property, I would encourage you to reach out to the power company, because they have an easement through there generally, and reach out to them and say, hey, this power line runs through our property. Here's what we want to do with it. More often than not, they're going to give you the go ahead. If you called them and said, I want to plant trees in the power line, then they're probably not going to be too fond of that. But if you're keeping it open and stopping it from becoming trees and shrubs and things like that, then more often than not, they're going to have no problem with how you manage that. And they can be really good spots because they usually meet the woods and provide good spots for food plots.
Well, Jared, thank you. I know if people haven't figured out it, you gave them a step-by-step plan of how to start to finish do this, and some great resources, and also kind of a plan of attack of different things to plant. So thank you for that.
Yeah, and I think one last thing, it's easy to overthink this. It's easy to overcomplicate it, but just have fun with it, enjoy it, and do the steps necessary, but don't overthink it. Just pick what works for you. Keeping it simple is better than overcomplicating it. I've worked with some landowners that really get into the fine details of doing this and have different things going on in different ways, which can be, there's nothing wrong with that, but keeping it simple is probably a good piece of advice.
Perfect. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you, Jared, again. Next week, we're back, same time, same channel, 3 o'clock on Thursday. We'll be talking about tree inspections. If you don't know, August is tree inspection or tree check month. So we encourage you to join us then. We'll have Lindsay Purcell, Elizabeth Barnes, and Cliff Sadoff joining us, talking to us about not only how to check your trees, but what to look for, some invasive disease and pests and things like that you also need to be aware of as we move into this next season. So join us next week. We'll talk more about trees and how to inspect them properly. And in the meantime, look up those resources in the comments section and get on it, because Jared says August 15th is our start date for planting these fall food plots, and we got to get those deer happy, right, Jared?
That's right. It's our sweet spot.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and we'll see you again next week.